Satellite data confirms it. A mountaintop is scorched black, though no volcano exists for 500 miles. A salt formation shaped like a woman's frame casts no shadow at noon. GPS tags track movement patterns. Around ruins, no one dares rebuild. Governments don't comment. Scientists remain quiet. But the word warned, in the last days, knowledge shall increase. What happens when that knowledge begins to see? What prophets saw first? 1. The burnt summit of Sinai. The fire burned, but did not consume. Atop a lonely mountain in Saudi Arabia, a summit stands blackened, charred like coal. Not by lava, not by time, but by something unexplainable. Satellite imaging confirms the discoloration is not natural. It stops precisely at the peak, as if flame fell from above and scorched it into silence. There are no volcanoes here, no tectonic activity, no recorded fires. And yet the stones atop Jebel al-Lawz, believed by many to be the true Mount Sinai, are blackened outside but untouched inside, cracked like lightning glass. Geologists remain uncertain. Government permits for excavation are often denied, but those who've stood there describe it the same way. It feels like the mountain remembers. The Book of Exodus records a moment unmatched in history, a mountain wrapped in smoke, fire descending, the voice of God like a trumpet blast. Not metaphor, not poetry, a real place, a real summit, still trembling with evidence. Some believe this is why the Saudis guard it, why satellite images blur its ridges, why those who've approached it speak less like tourists and more like witnesses. Because Sinai wasn't just where the law was given, it was where heaven touched earth. And now, centuries later, the ground has not healed. No botanist can explain why no vegetation grows. No meteorologist can explain the temperature drops at its peak. No historian can explain why the location was erased from maps for decades. But Exodus did. The mountain burned with fire unto the midst of heaven. A statement once seen as spiritual now appears geological. And if the fire never left, what else still lingers in the smoke? 2. The rock that bled water in the wilderness. It stands alone, split down the center as if struck by judgment. In the barren landscape of the northwestern Arabian desert, just miles from the blackened peak of Jebel al-Lawz, rises a solitary boulder, massive, out of place, and impossibly split from top to bottom. It is not cracked by erosion, nor chipped by wind. It is cleanly parted, as though cleaved by something divine. Locals call it the split rock of Horeb, but its true story runs deeper, because this is the place where, according to the Book of Exodus, Moses struck the rock, and water gushed out, and the evidence? Smooth channels worn into the granite floor below it, cut by flowing water, in a desert that hasn't seen sustained rainfall for millennia. Geologists are baffled. There's no aquifer nearby, no spring system beneath. Yet the patterns etched in stone suggest that a massive flow once surged from the rock's center. Exodus records a people dying of thirst, a prophet in desperation, and a command from heaven. Strike the rock, and water shall come out of it. And it did, enough to sustain a nation. But what if that moment never faded? Some believe the rock is more than a monument. It is a wound, still echoing with the cry of mercy. And perhaps that's why no grass grows at its feet, why the ground remains scarred like a battlefield. Because this was not just provision, it was prophecy. Paul wrote that the rock was Christ. Struck once, life poured out, not just in the wilderness, but at Calvary, and both bled. Now the rock remains, visible, splintered, like a reminder carved into the bones of the earth. If water flowed then, what will flow when the rock is struck again? 3. The Salt Woman. watching a dead city. She didn't vanish. She remained, preserved in judgment. Near the southern shores of the Dead Sea, where the air is thick with stillness and salt, there stands a pillar, eroded yet unmistakably shaped, tall, narrow, curved, with what many believe is a head turned backward. Locals have called it Lot's wife for centuries. Tourists gawk. Scientists call it coincidence. But the formation's location is no accident. It faces the ruins of what is widely believed to be ancient Sodom. Charred remains embedded with sulfur balls that ignite on contact. Genesis tells us that when fire rained from heaven and consumed the cities of the plain, Lot's wife disobeyed the command to flee without looking back. She turned, she paused, and she became a pillar of salt. Modern geology confirms the terrain here is unlike anywhere else in the region. Salt formations tower across the land, some rounded like domes, others jagged like spears. But only one bears this shape, and only one faces the ruins. Thermal imaging reveals no organic core, no fossil, just solid, hardened sodium chloride, dense enough to resist desert erosion. But the eeriest part? She casts no shadow at noon. Several researchers reported that during summer solstice, when the sun strikes directly overhead, the pillar vanishes into the landscape, as if heaven is erasing the memory for a moment. And yet, she remains, a warning in stone, a silent watchman. Jesus mentioned her by name, not in parable, but in prophecy. Remember Lot's wife, not as a relic, but as a signal, a moment of pause before judgment, a heartbeat of disobedience that still stands in salt and wind. And if she remains, what else has heaven left behind for us to remember? 4. The city that burned from the sky. Gomorrah's ashen walls. The walls still stand, but they crumble at the touch. South of the Dead Sea, near the base of Masada, lies a scorched, silent expanse where no birds fly, no animals wander, and no life dares rebuild. Ashen formations rise like melted fortresses, towers, doorways, even steps. But they're not made of stone. They're made of ash, and embedded within those formations, pure sulfur balls, round, white, and highly flammable, not found anywhere else in this form, not volcanic, not geological, but rained down, burned into what many now call the ruins of Gomorrah. When lit, the sulfur burns hotter than any natural fire, over 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So hot, it reduces the surrounding material to ash in seconds. And yet, these sulfur balls remain unburned, as if waiting. Genesis said it plainly. The Lord rained down fire and brimstone from heaven. That word, brimstone, is the same material scientists now find here, sealed inside once mighty walls that now flake like parchment. Skeptics claim erosion. But erosion doesn't shape doorways. It doesn't form ziggurat-like tiers. It doesn't embed sulfur balls uniformly across a landscape the size of a city. These ruins align perfectly with biblical geography, east of Hebron, near Zoar, and adjacent to the Salt Sea. They match Jewish oral tradition. They match ancient maps. And they remain untouched by history's conquerors. Because who would rebuild where heaven once judged? The ruins of Gomorrah are not buried. They are exposed, open, and disintegrating slowly, like a warning being whispered to a generation not listening. If the fire fell once, is it possible it waits again? Just beyond the clouds. 5. The river that heals, Ezekiel's waters and the Dead Sea. Rift waters once cursed are starting to stir. The Dead Sea has never known life. It is the lowest place on Earth, nearly 10 times saltier than the ocean. No fish, no plants, no movement, just silence, mineral rot, and still death. But something is changing. Over the past decade, freshwater springs have begun to bubble up from the southern basin. Fish, tiny, silvery, flickering, have been spotted near these pools. Life is returning. No scientist has a firm explanation. Some call it geological shifting. Others blame flash floods. But neither accounts for what's happening beneath the crust. The rift is widening. The earth is groaning. And one name keeps echoing: Ezekiel. In his vision, the prophet saw a river flowing from the temple eastward, spilling into the Dead Sea and healing its waters. He wrote of fishermen standing along its shores, of fish from the great sea appearing, of salt becoming fresh. For centuries, this was dismissed as metaphor. But now, water flows, and fish live. The Israeli government has acknowledged it. Satellite scans confirm it. And spiritual watchmen have begun to whisper, "Is this the river Ezekiel saw?" More strange still, these freshwater pools appear in direct alignment with the Temple Mount. Not in randomness, but in rhythm. A slow, silent river, not built by engineers, but by prophecy. And here's the part no scientist can explain. These springs appear and disappear. One month, they bubble. The next, they're gone. As if the land is breathing, testing its lungs before the floodgates open. Could it be that heaven is preparing the ground, that the water is rehearsing for something larger, something permanent? If a river flows from the threshold of the temple, whose footsteps will follow it? 6. The altar that can't be moved, the unshaken stone of Moriah. It has never cracked, never shifted, never left its place. At the center of the Temple Mount lies an ancient, immovable rock, the foundation stone. Revered by Jews, guarded by Muslims, and feared by politicians, it is the only part of the first and second temples that remains untouched, not destroyed, not excavated, not moved. And no one can agree on how deep it goes. Some say it touches bedrock, others believe it's hollow beneath. But all agree on this: no force, no conquest, no empire has ever been able to remove it. Why? Because Genesis places this location as the very ground where Abraham raised his blade over Isaac, because 2 Chronicles declares it the spot where Solomon built the temple, and because Jewish tradition says it is the very stone from which the world was formed. It is a convergence point of creation, covenant, and sacrifice. Today, it lies beneath the dome of the rock, silent, but not asleep. Muslim tradition claims Muhammad ascended from it. Christian prophecy sees it as the heart of the future temple. And Israel, it watches, but does not touch. What scientists can't explain is why this stone resonates. Seismic tests have shown it to be unusually dense, resistant to movement, immune to erosion despite millennia of exposure. And during rare moments of regional quake activity, the stone does not tremble. It absorbs, it holds, like it's anchored to something eternal. In Psalm 118, it is written, "The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone." But what if that wasn't just about a man? What if it's also about a mountain, a physical altar, waiting, watching, remembering? And if heaven calls for a sacrifice again, will this stone speak? 7. The bush that burns in silence, the unconsumed flame of Sinai's shadow. There are flames that warm and flames that whisper. Nestled near the foot of what many believe is the true Mount Sinai, in a hidden valley of St. Catherine's Monastery, grows a bush unlike any other, gnarled, thorned, evergreen, unbending. Locals say it's been here for millennia. The monks call it sacred, but it's the story behind it and the mystery it carries that chills the heart. This is the site long believed to be where Moses encountered the burning bush, where flame danced but did not destroy, where the voice of God called from fire, and time paused. Today, this bush remains, healthy, thriving, and surrounded by questions no botanist can fully answer. It does not seed. It resists drought. It grows only in that one location. Attempts to transplant it elsewhere have failed without explanation. Some have studied its cellular structure, nothing unusual. Others tested the soil, ordinary, yet something makes it other. It survives where few plants do, untouched by frost, wind, or the weight of time. But then came the oddest report. Whispers from monks who tend it in silence. On certain nights, just before dawn, a faint glow can be seen behind its branches. No flame, no light source, just a shimmer, like a breath caught between worlds. The bush does not speak, but those who kneel before it say they feel watched, not by fear, but by memory. In Exodus, God called Moses to remove his sandals, for the ground was holy. And perhaps it still is. Perhaps the fire never left. Perhaps the voice still waits, behind the leaves, behind obedience. Because heaven doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just burns, quietly, and waits to be noticed. And if that same voice calls again, will we take off our shoes or walk away from the flame? 8. The shadow that doesn't move. Jericho's collapsed walls and the echoing curse. The walls fell once, but something else still stands. Near the ruins of ancient Jericho, archaeologists have uncovered what they believe are the remnants of one of the oldest fortified cities on Earth. Circular stone foundations, ash layers, and most telling of all, walls that did not erode, they imploded. Not toppled by siege, not worn down by age, but sunken, straight into the earth, as if pressed by a hand from above. Joshua's conquest of Jericho was no battle. It was a command. 7 days, 7 circuits, 7 trumpets, and on the 7th day, the walls fell flat. Today, that site remains exposed, not rebuilt, not buried, but preserved. And what's most haunting isn't the fallen stones. It's the shadow they cast. Drone imaging has recorded something strange. A distinct darkened pattern across the excavation site, visible only at certain times of day. The shadow doesn't shift like the rest of the terrain. It lingers, static, fixed, even when sun and season change. Some believe it's coincidence. Others, a mark. Because Joshua pronounced a curse upon Jericho after its fall, a curse that whoever tried to rebuild it would do so at the cost of their firstborn and their youngest. And what history shows, every attempt to rebuild ancient Jericho has failed. Walls collapse, wells run dry, funding vanishes. And in at least 2 cases, fatalities match the very pattern described in Joshua's warning. Even modern expansion avoids the ancient mound. Roads bend around it. Builders stay away. The air around the site, thick, still, unwelcoming. Because maybe what fell wasn't just stone. Maybe it was judgment. And judgment sometimes leaves a mark not even time can erase. If the shadow hasn't moved in 3,000 years, is it waiting for someone to step inside it again? 9. The fire that walked, Mount Carmel's charred soil, and the contest that still echoes. The fire didn't fall. It descended, with purpose. High atop Mount Carmel, overlooking the Mediterranean Sea, lies a windswept ridge where prophets once stood and the sky answered a challenge. Here, Elijah stood alone against 450 prophets of Baal. No swords, no army, only an altar and a voice raised to heaven. And heaven responded. Then the fire of the Lord fell. It consumed the offering, the wood, the stones, the dust, even the water in the trench. Today, that site is marked by a stone monument. But more than that, it's marked by something strange beneath the surface. Soil samples from parts of the ridge show high levels of vitrification, a process where stone and earth are melted by extreme heat. The kind of heat no wildfire could produce, no lightning strike could sustain. And the burn pattern? Concentrated, circular, specific. As if fire didn't just fall, but landed, walked, judged. To this day, the earth on that hill refuses to grow more than shallow shrubs. No deep roots, no sustained greenery. As if something holy scorched the ground and made it remember. Scientists shrug. Historians debate. But those who visit, they go silent. Because they feel it. The pressure, the weight. Like the atmosphere still carries the echo of Elijah's words. Let it be known this day that you are God. And in a world that worships newer idols, power, fame, wealth, Mount Carmel still stands, still waiting, not for a prophet, but for the next question, the next contest. If fire walked once, who will it answer to next? 10. The tomb that couldn't hold him, the empty grave that divides time. There are graves that mourn, and one that proclaims. Just outside Jerusalem's walls lies a garden, quiet, reverent, shielded by olive trees and limestone paths. At its heart, a rock-hewn tomb carved into a hillside, empty, silent, but not forgotten. This isn't folklore, this is fact. The garden tomb matches the details given in the Gospels. A new tomb, near a place of execution, a large stone rolled away, and inside, nothing. Archaeologists can't verify the name once sealed into its stone. But what they cannot deny is that no body was ever found. Every founder of every religion lies buried, their bones revered, their names enshrined in dust. But this tomb, it offers no bones, only breath, and that's the scandal of it. The reason it's guarded with doubt. Because if this tomb is truly empty, if its vacancy is not myth, but memory, then everything changes. The Roman seal was broken. The soldiers fled. And the grave clothes, as the text says, were folded. Not tossed, not stolen. As if death had been undone politely. The stone was not rolled from the inside. It was rolled by an unseen hand. A divine reversal. And now, 2,000 years later, the tomb still draws millions. Not to weep, but to witness. Because even in silence, it speaks louder than any sermon. The stone walls carry no inscription, no epitaph, because the one who lay there left behind no legacy of death, only resurrection. And scientists, they've scanned, measured, disputed, but the grave remains stubbornly vacant. Because the one thing science cannot explain is the one thing faith proclaims with certainty. He isn't there. And if the tomb is truly empty, if death truly lost, then we are not watching the end of history, but the beginning of eternity. And the door that opened in that tomb may be the same door that opens again, soon. The mountain is still black. The rock is still split. The salt still stands. The tomb is still empty. And heaven is still watching. These aren't just remnants. They are reminders, etched into the earth by fire, by flood, by glory. The signs were never meant to fade. They were meant to last, until the return. So now the question isn't whether the Bible is true. The question is, are we ready for what's coming next?